Agatha Christie is one of the most well-known and best-selling mystery writers in history, so it's only fitting that she left one of the biggest in her wake. Agatha Miller was born on September the 15th, 1890 in Devon, England, into quite a wealthy upper middle class family. The youngest of three, with her two older siblings Margaret and Lewis, to parents Frederick and Clarissa. Agatha did have a relatively happy childhood, mostly spent in Devon, though she did frequently visit relatives in Ealing and Bayswater as well, and the family liked to have their holidays overseas in the likes of Paris, the French Pyrenees and Guernsey. However, there weren't many children in the local neighbourhood, and due to the large age gap between Agatha and her siblings, she spent most of her time playing alone, with their pets, or by creating imaginary friends. She did eventually extend her social circle in the area, even appearing in a youth production of The Yeoman of the Guard. But for some reason, her mother Clara didn't want Agatha to learn to read until she was 8 years old, but she had become far too curious and taught herself by the age of 4. Her sister was soon sent away to boarding school, leading to Clara insisting that Agatha be homeschooled. During her studies, she enjoyed maths, reading and writing, and quickly learned to play the piano and mandolin. In 1901, Agatha wrote her first poem, named The Cowslip, but sadly it was around this time when her father's health began to decline due to heart problems. In November, he would eventually succumb to pneumonia and chronic kidney disease, passing away with his daughter Agatha only being 11 years old. She would later claim that this marked the end of her childhood. With Frederick now gone, the family's financial situation began to worsen. In 1902, Margaret got married and moved away to Cheadle in Cheshire, while Lewis, known as Monty, went overseas to join the British Regiment, leaving just Agatha and her mother alone. It was this year when she joined the Miss Guyers Girls' School in Torquay, but the atmosphere was rather disciplined, which she found difficult to adjust to. 3 years later, and Clarissa sent Agatha away to Paris, where she attended several boarding schools and focused on vocal training, as well as improving on the piano. However, Agatha felt like she lacked the temperament and talent, thus quitting all of her hopes of ever becoming a concert pianist or an opera singer, quickly returning to England. Between 1907 and 1908, Agatha spent a few winter months in Cairo, but at the time she wasn't particularly interested in archaeology or Egyptology. Once back home, she continued her writing and studying amateur theatrics, and she even aided in a production of a play called The Blue Beard of Unhappiness. It was that same year when Agatha turned 18 years old, and she wrote her first ever short story, The House of Beauty, while she was ill in bed. It contained 6,000 words about madness and dreams, which truly fascinated her, and would end up becoming a very early version of her story, The House of Dreams. Her stories would often include her fascination with spiritualism and the paranormal, such as The Call of Wings and The Little Lonely God. She began submitting some of her writings to magazines under pseudonyms, but they were all rejected. Though years later, when she became successful, these would all be revised and published under her real name. She soon began work on her first full novel, named Snow Upon the Desert, which she based on her experience in Cairo, but it was declined by 6 publishers. However, her family friend Eden Philpotts was a novelist, and he loved it, sending it to his own literary agent. And although they also turned it down, they were interested in Agatha writing a second one instead. Over the years, she only ever had short-term relationships until October of 1912, where she met Royal Artillery Archie Christie at a dance, and they soon began a romance, even becoming engaged just 3 months after meeting. However, by August 1914, Archie was sent over to France to fight in the First World War. But on Christmas Eve that year, during his home leave in Bristol, he and Agatha got married at Emmanuel Church in Clifton, now becoming Agatha Christie. Over the years, with her husband in combat, Agatha involved herself as a member of the Voluntary Aid Detachment of the British Red Cross, and she ended up working over 3,400 hours in the Town Hall Red Cross Hospital, first as an unpaid nurse and then as a dispenser. In her husband's absence, Agatha continued her writings. She was a big fan of detective novels such as Sherlock Holmes, and in 1916, after her sister bet Agatha that she could never write a good mystery, she decided to write her own. The mysterious affair at Styles, which involved a former Belgian police officer taking refuge in Britain after Germany had invaded. But this original manuscript was again rejected by publishers. Regardless, she kept hold of it for months before the Bodley Head finally showed interest. They actually agreed to publish it, but only if the solution at the end was changed. Agatha agreed and even signed over her next 5 books to them as well, despite admitting later that she felt a bit exploited by them. This novel would end up being published 4 years later. It wasn't until September 1918 when Archie, who was now a colonel, was finally sent back to Britain. The couple moved to London, renting a flat in St John's Wood, and it was here where Agatha Christie's legacy truly began to unfold. In August the following year, she gave birth to their daughter Rosalind Margaret Clarissa. After he had left the war, Archie also left the Air Force and began working in the city financial sector, though it was on a low income. By 1922, Agatha released her second novel, The Secret Adversary, which was about a new detective couple. This book got them £50, which is the equivalent of around £2,900 today, which opened the door for the rest of her career. It led to her third novel, Murder on the Links, and the couple were now bringing in money with ease. That same year, the couple left their daughter with Agatha's mother and sister before joining an around-the-world promotional tour for the British Empire exhibition, led by Major Ernest Belcher. For 10 months they travelled to South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii and Canada. It was during this tour where Agatha learned how to surf in South Africa, and in Hawaii they became some of the first ever Brits to surf standing up. Once back home, they moved from apartment to apartment before buying a house in Sunningdale, Berkshire, which they named Styles after her first novel. Sadly, in April 1926, Agatha's mother Clarissa tragically passed away. They were always incredibly close, and Agatha soon fell into a deep depression, giving up on writing her current book and struggling to come up with anything new. Reports began to circulate that in August that year, Agatha headed to a village near Biarritz to recuperate after a breakdown caused by overwork and stress. To make matters worse, Archie asked her for a divorce, as he was now in love with their friend Nancy Neal.
I just wanted my life to end. As I passed by Newlands Corner that afternoon, I saw a quarry and there came into my mind a thought of driving into it. However, as my daughter was with me in the car, I dismissed the idea at once.
On December the 3rd that year, the couple got into an argument as he wanted to spend the weekend away with some friends without her. Agatha then put their daughter to bed before packing a suitcase and silently leaving the property, completely disappearing. The next morning, her Morris Cowley was found at Newlands Corner in Surrey, hanging over the edge with her expired driving licence and some clothes inside. It was believed that she drowned herself in the Silent Pool, which is a beauty spot nearby. Her disappearance quickly became national news, with a £100 reward being offered, the equivalent of around £6,400 today. Over 1,000 police officers and 15,000 volunteers helped, with several airplanes searching the nearby area, but nothing was found. This made it onto the front page of the New York Times, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes book series, even provided one of her gloves to a spirit medium in order to try to find her, to no avail. Just 3 days after the disappearance, and the search was completely called off, as Agatha's brother-in-law Campbell came out to claim that she actually wrote him a letter after disappearing, saying that she was going to a spa in Yorkshire for some rest and treatment. Unfortunately, the letter had since been destroyed, so it was merely his word that the authorities had to go on, leading to them concluding that it was all a fake and the search should continue. But they still didn't check any of the spas in Yorkshire. She also left behind a letter for her assistant with her schedule on it, but also one for her husband, which he refused to hand over to authorities and supposedly burned it, claiming that it contained no information about her whereabouts whatsoever. Countless sightings came in from across the country, but they all led to dead ends. One of her dogs was brought to her abandoned car in hopes that it would smell out her scent, but the animal reportedly just whined pitifully. Investigators believe that she may be hiding in London, dressed as a man, and they even searched through her novels for any potential clues. Agatha Christie was missing for 11 days, but even when she was found, things didn't get any less peculiar. On December the 14th, 1926, Agatha Christie was spotted at the Swan Hydropathic Hotel in Harrogate in Yorkshire, dancing away on the dance floor, 148 miles north of her home, registered under the name as Mrs. Tessa Neal, the surname of her husband's lover, claiming to have been from Cape Town in South Africa. The letter was real after all. Agatha had abandoned her own car before travelling to London and then boarding a train to Harrogate, somehow not being recognised or approached during her travels or stay, despite the world searching for her. Once the police were informed, Archie travelled to the hotel, but once meeting, Agatha stared at him in complete confusion, having absolutely no idea who her husband was. She underwent several psychiatric tests and over time claimed that it gradually did restore her memory.
All that night, I drove aimlessly about. When I reached a point on the road, which I thought was near the quarry I had seen in the afternoon, I turned the car off the road down the hill towards it. I left the wheel and let the car run. The car struck something with a jerk and pulled up suddenly. I was flung against the steering wheel and my head hit something. Up to this moment, I was Mrs. Christie. After the accident in the car, however, I lost my memory. I remember arriving at a big railway station and asking what it was, and being surprised it was Waterloo. It is strange that the railway authorities there did not recall me, as I was covered with mud and I had smeared blood on my face from a cut on my head. I then remember arriving at the hotel in Harrogate. I was still muddy and showing signs of my accident when I arrived there. I had now become, in my mind, Mrs. Tessa Neal of South Africa. As Mrs. Neal, I was very happy and contented. I had become, as it were, a new woman, and all the worries and anxieties of Mrs. Christie had left me. When I was brought back to my life as Mrs. Christie again, many of my worries and anxieties returned, and although I am not quite well and cheerful, and have lost my morbid tendencies completely, I have not quite that utter happiness of Mrs. Neal.
2 doctors actually diagnosed Agatha with unquestionable, genuine loss of memory, though this has often been debated. Her biographer Morgan believed that she simply vanished during a fugue state, which is backed up by historian Lucy Worsley, who stated,
"She had fallen into a fugue state. Now, this is a very rare condition, and it causes you to step right outside your normal self and adopt another persona, so that you don't have to think about the trauma you've been experiencing in your current situation. That's not framing your cheating husband for murder. That is living with a really serious mental health condition. And yet the narrative is that she was somehow a bad person who was playing some sort of a trick on the world. Perhaps she was doing it to frame the husband. Perhaps she was doing it to get attention to sell novels."
While author Gerard Cade is under the impression that she merely planned the entire thing to try to embarrass her husband, not expecting the huge public melodrama that came with it. Another biographer, Laura Thompson, believes that Agatha had a nervous breakdown and was fully conscious of her actions, but wasn't in any emotional control of herself at the time, while the public were fully convinced that it was all a publicity stunt to try to frame her husband for her disappearance, or to fake her own death and frame him for murder, especially considering that her car was abandoned just 6 miles from Nancy Neal's house, on the very weekend that Archie was planning to stay with her. The theory is that she knew that her disappearance would make national news and would hope that this would increase book sales, despite Agatha Christie famously hating the limelight and often struggling with stage fright. At the time, Agatha simply believed that she suffered from memory loss after crashing her car. She claimed to have been suffering severe insomnia around the time, only sleeping around 2 hours a night, suffering depression and suicidal thoughts on the day of her disappearance. This has been called into question, however, as she would have most likely read about her own disappearance in the newspaper, saw her face and realised that she was a missing person. though Agatha has responded to these claims by saying,
I read every day about Mrs. Christie's disappearance and came to the conclusion that she was dead. I regarded her as having acted stupidly. I was greatly struck by my resemblance to her and pointed it out to other people in the hotel. It never occurred to me I might be her, as I was quite satisfied in my mind to who I was.
But many doubted her entire story, claiming that it was just as fiction as any of her books. Most believing this was all a carefully calculated ploy to get even with her husband. But strangely, other than an interview 2 years after the fact providing the aforementioned quotes, Agatha Christie never publicly acknowledged the disappearance. Even in her own autobiography, she avoided the subject completely, other than the words,
So after illness came sorrow, despair and heartbreak. There is no need to dwell on it.
She seemingly just continued to live her life as normal. In January 1927, Agatha looked incredibly pale and went sailing with her daughter and secretary to the Canary Islands to try to escape the press, and wouldn't return for another 3 months. By April the following year, she filed for divorce, which was finalised in October, and Archie would remarry to Nancy just a week later, with Agatha maintaining custody of the daughter Rosalind. That same year, she left England and headed to Istanbul and then Baghdad, where she met archaeologist Max Malawan, who was 13 years her junior. The couple would end up marrying in Edinburgh in September of 1930. 4 years later, and they bought Winterbrook House near Wallingford, which became their main residence, where Agatha Christie would do most of her writing for the rest of her life. Despite being famous and the media frenzy surrounding her disappearance, Agatha Christie went on to live a quiet life in her neighbourhood, even becoming the president of the local amateur dramatic society and a devout member of the church.
My chief dislikes are crowds, loud noises, gramophones and cinemas. I dislike the taste of alcohol, and I do not like smoking. I do like sun, sea, flowers, travelling, strange foods, sports, concerts, theatres, pianos and doing embroidery.
In 1938, she acquired the Greenway estate in Devon, which would later be given to the National Trust. However, she wasn't satisfied becoming what she described as an employed wage slave, setting up a private company in 1955 for tax reasons so that she could hold on to the rights of her work. In 1969, the Agatha Christie Trust for Children was established, and later a charitable memorial fund would also be set up to try to help others. But as the 1970s rolled around, sadly, Agatha Christie's health began to decline. But it didn't stop her from writing, with her final novel, The Postern of Fate, coming out in 1973. She was suffering from Alzheimer's disease or possibly dementia, and on January the 12th, 1976, Agatha Christie sadly passed away peacefully from natural causes in Winterbrook House at the age of 85. Her funeral was attended by 20 newspaper and TV reporters, leaving behind a legacy of novels and mysteries beyond her written work. The following year, Max Malawan remarried, but he also passed away in 1978 and was buried next to Christie. It wasn't until the year 2000 when the daughter of Agatha's sister-in-law and friend, Nan Watts, came out in an interview to claim that she knew the truth and had done since she was a child, witnessing it firsthand with her mother and Christie herself, claiming that Agatha was hidden away at their home in Chelsea before being put on a train to Harrogate the following day. At the time of her death, Agatha Christie was the best-selling novelist in history, having sold over 100 million copies of her books, worth £20 million, which is around 102.9 million today. But due to her tax planning, she only left behind £106,683 in her will, the equivalent of today's £817,000. But the fans she gained around the world from her stories continue to honour her work, and it's certainly fitting that only someone as talented as Agatha Christie was in writing such dramatic mysteries would leave behind one of the greatest of all, as we all continue seeking answers. Hello guys, this is Rob from Seeking Answers. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. If you do want to see more, please consider donating to Patreon or clicking that join button below to become a channel member. Unfortunately, YouTube's monetization doesn't really cater to the content that we make, so we do need all the help that we can get. I also realised that not everyone is able to give a monthly payment, so there is now a PayPal link in the description if anyone does want to donate a one-off payment. Doesn't matter the amount, any amount is appreciated. And if you do a one-off payment, you'll be able to request a case for us to cover, and it will really go towards helping the channel out and continuing to grow the community. Any amount is appreciated and it will go towards keeping this channel alive and making more content, going on location more. You will get perks in exchange and you will help really give this channel the boost it needs. Thank you for all of your support and tune in next week for another video.